Dilrukshi Handuneti. I would like you to welcome her or join me in welcoming Dilrukshi. She's a friend. Hi, Dilrukshi. Good to have you in our midst, talking to our students today. Dilrukshi is the Executive Director of the Center for Investigative Reporting in Sri Lanka. She's a well-known and multiple award-winning journalist, over 2 decades of journalism. She has been specializing in investigative reporting, and she actually studied investigative reporting from Columbia University. So she has served as a senior associate editor and then consulting editor for various weeklies and dailies in Sri Lanka. Uh, but she has also appeared on various television channels such as Al Jazeera and various other platforms, and of course in newspapers such as The Guardian and other international newspapers. So and in 2012, she won the Journalist of the Year award, presented by the Editors Guild of Sri Lanka, which is basically the highest award to be won by a Sri Lankan journalist. And yet, if you talk to her, she's so modest, you wouldn't realize all this. And this actually, she's also one of the 6 global recipients of the Wash Media Award 2014, presented by the Stockholm International Water Institute and Water Supply and Sanitation Collaborative Council for excellence in reporting on the MDGs that have been set for the world. She's also the co-convener for South Asian Women in Media for Sri Lanka, and she's a gender focal point for the International Federation of Journalists, or IFJ, which is one of the most prestigious associations they have in journalism, for the Asia Pacific. So again, welcome, Dilrukshi. It's a privilege for us to have you in our midst and share your views on what I believe will be extremely important from a media literacy point of view, because that's what we're trying to do. Remember that all our careers, we've been talking to journalists and we've been talking to media persons, but the media literacy program does basically we are addressing people who are non-media, and I know that you work so closely with journalists in your circles, um, educating them on what good journalism should be as a part of the center that you head. So maybe briefly, if you could introduce us to that effort, it will lead us on very well into my other questions, Mike.
Thank you, Sashi. It's really, really good to connect with you. And thank you very much for the invitation to connect with the students. It's really, really a big privilege. And thank you for that long list of, I've never read my bio. So thank you very much for saying all that. It's way too much of an introduction. To speak a little about why we do what we do. I'm a journalist, and as you know, my motto is, I love to write and I live to write. So that's always been my case, and why I became a journalist, and why I chose journalism over what I studied, that is law. But as a journalist, as you work in newsrooms, and as you also become a reporter and then you become an editor, you also realize there are multiple issues within newsrooms. So I'm not an academic, so my understanding is more from a very professional point of view, where you actually sweat it out and understand that journalism needs an extra understanding of what the issues are. You cannot do good, really impactful stories. You cannot inform the public. You cannot do good stories if you do not know what media literacy is all about. That we need to be literate about our industry. So that's how I walked into the center, and that's why I wanted to have an institution as part of a shared mission with my colleagues. We all felt that instead of blaming the industry, saying that things are not right, we just want to do what we can do. And that is also, we didn't want to do what other people are doing, what others are doing, which is to replicate the models that exist. We looked at technology, we looked at in-depth reporting, which is what investigative journalism is about. And then we thought, what doesn't happen in newsrooms? Let's try to do a few things that will help people to become better journalists. Because investigative journalism is costly, it takes time, it's rigorous.
I know that you're such an evangelist for investigative journalism and in-depth information and all that. You really think people care? Do you think that people are media literate enough in general to be able to critically analyze the depth of what you give them, or is that something that we are still struggling?
Okay. A very good question. I wouldn't even have the right answer, but to say, I also think sometimes we take it for granted that people don't have the literacy or people do not want to be literate. And most journalists also think that we know it best. So we need to dish it out to people. So this is one of the things that the internet has done to us. It has made the playing field has become a lot more equal because people can become generators of content. And into that, you bring in models like ours, where there's a lot of mainstream media, and we assume, uh, we are the only ones who have knowledge. We are the only ones who've got tools. No, it is not. Tools are being used elsewhere as well, and by younger folk who are more tech savvy. Whether people care, I think they do. And you can also call me, someone who has a very romanticized notion about good journalism. I still believe in it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. I believe there is value for good investigative journalism. I think there is good value attached to good information. And if we are talking about integrity of content, integrity of information that is out there, there's so much information. We call it an infodemic. We are just living through a pandemic, and there's an infodemic, and people do care. And if you I can give you a quick example. Earlier, people used to, what would people want to use the internet for? A lot, multiple reasons and multiple ways of use. People actually stopped using, checking out those cat videos when the pandemic hit, for a reason, because information became so important. Information became something that can really save lives. And and that's the point I want to make, that good information, good storytelling has value. It's just that the industry has also failed to relay good information and to showcase what we can do for the betterment of the society and the communities that we represent. It's collectively also our failure that information is not valued because we don't know how to present good, valuable information to the public at large.
That's actually plus the context and the correct pandemic situation that we are currently in, and probably as we go forward, a lot of things might change. How does integrity come into the picture? Because what you're telling me right now is that in a crisis like this, the news I can use is paramount, and therefore it is making the media a little more aware of its responsibility. But
Yeah.
does that also bring out the responsibility in the viewer or in the consumer of information? Which means basically that am I going to be more proactive in searching out news that I can use? Or and is there a better match between journalists and their audience?
Excellent question, because I think it's a two-way process. It has become a two-way process at least many, many years ago. With the internet, I think it really became a two-way process because you have consumers, you also have content producers, and content producers no longer hold the domain. Basically, we don't dominate the domain because if you don't have a consumer at the other end, you have a problem. Your information is not being received. But yes, it cuts both ways. Information has to be authentic.
Sorry to cut you there. The difference between a journalist and a content producer is basically that everybody is a content producer. Whereas a journalist
Yes,
can go into the field and get
yes,
authentic information. That is what you call integrity.
yes. So exactly. So what we call is when a journalist calls information as containing information that has integrity. What we really mean is that it's verified information. any content producer may not necessarily have the skills or may not feel the necessity except the desire to share the information. So then you're a content producer creating information, sharing information, you're placing it in the public domain. You're also doing my job to an extent, but I'm different. I'm different because I have a responsibility to verify my information. And as a team, we have a responsibility to verify information, particularly in the context you mentioned. There is a pandemic. Information is life saving or life threatening. So there is an onus on a journalist to relay information uh, as best as that person can, having used tools, having used all the integrity tools that you may use to make sure that the information you are sharing, placing in the public domain are of utmost value. It can actually save lives, that kind of information. So I think there is a big difference. And to answer your audience question, yes, people are receiving information. If we, India and Sri Lanka have a lot of cultural ties, and we have shared heritage. So our cultures are not very different. People tell stories. You go to the well and the women gather. So that's a very gender insensitive comment, perhaps. But at the same time, this is how culture evolves. People can connect, and at the tea kiosk, men gather and play chess, ludo, whatever, and then they share information. It isn't true. Some of it may be true. So do we demand the same integrity from that information, or do we, now that we have the tools and the mechanisms in place, do we demand integrity from those who are supposed to be the professional information presenters, people who actually managing information systems for the public?
Why information is actually important for us. A lot of people, as you said, you could sit at a tea kiosk or katta, as they say in Pune or
Yes.
other places, and share gossip or other content. So what we share on social media is also basically forms of gossip, forms of content that may or may not be true, but then that's because we don't really care if it's, we don't have the responsibility to share information as you as a journalist might. And that is why we probably get away with it. Then the consumer of that may not necessarily know what they're signing up for. So the difference you brought out between information and content is, I think, very, very important going forward. Because the next thing I was going to talk about is, I call these prosumers. We
Yes.
we're all consumers of information or content, as well as the reproducers of information of content. So beyond what we share on our own, we also reproduce a lot of information that you as a journalist might give us, and then we reproduce it on the social media, for example, with our own little posts, right? Maybe I give an opinion in my post, and then you post it. What do you believe? I mean, first of all, do you believe I have a responsibility as a prosumer?
I think you do. If we learned anything from the pandemic, as people who are working in the information sector broadly, I think we learned the hard way that information is critically important, and there is a lot of responsibility that goes with it. To give you a simple example, in Sri Lanka, when the pandemic started and the infections, the number of infected persons began to increase, suddenly there were. I'm sure this is a very South Asian thing to be, pushing people into ghettos and identifying them, racially profiling them, giving them ethnic religious profiles and identifying them and targeting them and condemning them. And I see that in India, and I see that in Sri Lanka, and I see it elsewhere. So suddenly there were communities that were supposed to be the careers of the disease. And then there is this growing fear about the neighborhoods. People begin to worry about living in those neighborhoods, whether we are also open to infection. And suddenly people have clashes. People have not only opinion clashes, people actually want to attack people. And they think that you came into the country so irresponsibly, you did not, obviously people did not know so much about the pandemic or COVID-19, as we now know, what it means, what the symptoms are, whether we have to have symptoms. So then we are also learning. Journalists are learning, people are learning. Along with that, our absolute fear for our lives will also increase. It did increase, and our base instincts are also very alert at that point, and we are actually targeting people, condemning people, and we also want to find who is bringing this disease into the country. So if it wasn't a particular community, that because of the way in which they live, and they are the carriers of the disease, then there are migrant workers. I know this is happening in India. It's something that's happening in Sri Lanka. People actually call them COVID bombs. Look at the way we use words. They are carriers of a disease. They are COVID bombs. Sri Lanka has to heavily rely on foreign remittance. We have a remittance economy. Yeah.
When you say they are called carriers of COVID-19 or COVID bombs, who is doing the actual calling? Are people calling them on social media such as Twitter and Facebook? Is that what's happening?
That's a very good question, because that cuts both ways, as I'm sure you know the
It
context.
could be
Because
motivated, but ultimately it does appear.
yes, there are politicians. So we live in such, let's say, our civil liberties are quite constrained, and this situation, the pandemic, has also created more situations where there's information control, civic liberties are under control, and such situations also provide for those who want to control people, contain information, or manage information, to come out and do their job. So you, at a point, you have those in power controlling information and calling certain types of people as vectors of the disease. And then you also have people sharing that, because we work with huge propaganda machines in our countries. So one says it, and then there are people who will amplify that voice multiple times. And if we will be very, very naive to believe that this is not systematic. There are systems in place to give these amplified voices and create dissension, and then you walk in right there, because you are never working in a silo. You are not just one person sharing something. You are part of a system. You are part of a propaganda machine. So
Sometimes,
fact and fiction. Sorry.
sometimes without knowing.
Yes, sometimes without knowing, sometimes with knowledge and with enough buy-in. And that's the problem. When you are consuming information, how you're used. I mean, I want to know how I'm used, how my data is used, how my content is used, how my story is shared, whether somebody gives it a utterly terrible spin to it, or gives a better explanation than even I could give. But I have no control once I place it in the public domain. But people use information for multiple ways, for multiple reasons. So I think we are at a stage, at a time, that we have to play this conscious role of being as much as possible in control of the information you want to share. Because one quick example, I know it happened again in India, it happened here. People were arrested for sharing information using social media platforms. 19 persons were arrested during the lockdown. We had 2 months of lockdown. We no longer have a lockdown. So what were they faulted for? For sharing information. That's the other thing. As much as players, actors, bad actors may be using you to be that vehicle for disinformation. Misinformation is when you're innocent, but there is also really propaganda taking place. So they can also come after you. So that also makes you want to be responsible, because just for sharing a post, you don't want to be responsible legally for a post you shared, and also go through a sentence or something like that, or be fined in court for sharing information that is irresponsibly done. So I think now people have to really think that information sharing, not only generation, has to be done with tremendous responsibility.
It's very important what you say. What it brings me to is the availability of technology should not automatically mean its free use. In a way, that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Well,
Or it should mean responsible.
I will. I'm a journalist. I'm definitely going to say it has to be responsibly used. Information sharing to me has always been something for the past 25 years, something to be done with utmost responsibility. But that also comes with the training I have. So we go back to that old argument that you raised about media literacy, how I want to use information. I think media literacy has for too long been the conversation among journalists and academics. I think it's a conversation to be had with the public as well. Because if you're not only consuming information, you're also generating content. And the impact of what I produce, if I responsibly reproduce that content, by sharing, by believing in it, you can actually be a victim. I can victimize you. So you're being disempowered by the use of knowledge tools that I may have. So who wants to be disempowered? I think we all want to feel empowered. So right now, you really have to use these tools in a way that empowers you, that emancipates you, that empowers you, that also makes you a responsible citizen, responsible person in your community. Because yes, there will be authorities coming after you, there will be also credibility issues attached to you, and situations like that will highlight, such fault lines will be further highlighted in situations like that. You may not feel the stress in rather ordinary quiet times, but right now everybody feels the heat. You will be made to feel the heat. I think it also creates great conditions for us to up our game and to generate a better conversation about why we all have to be literate as consumers and producers of information. Because who says information is for journalists and academics? Information is for everybody. So information has to be true, correct, authenticated, because we want to believe in it. We should have the ability to believe in it. So integrity of content has become something really very important for journalists today, because if you don't have it, you're going to get discredited. Right now, there is a great conversation happening in Sri Lanka, because we all know there are players. Media houses are part of propaganda machines. In India, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, we all share this. It's quite a terrifying situation in that sense. But we also find journalists who want to understand their own responsibility, taking a deeper look. Because I, as a journalist, wouldn't want somebody to say you're part of a propaganda machine, you share that story without any responsibility. I want to be responsible for the information I share. So I also think it has created a great opportunity for journalists to look at their own work, look at their own work ethic, and understand that verification is part of your ethics. We used to believe in this thing called 5Ws. 5Ws, why is it that a consumer doesn't want to demand 5Ws?
What, who, why, when, and where. And then, of course, the how. Yeah.
So I think the 5Ws are not the journalist preserve. I think it's also the citizens preserve. When, where, how is important to me as a citizen. And of course, it is important to me as a journalist. But I think people have to start demanding the day communities, citizens want to demand responsibility, and it's happening. There are citizens in all our countries demanding more responsible journalism from journalists, from media houses, saying that you are nothing but a propaganda machine. This is already happening, and that's also one of the reasons why there are lots of digital startups, and the people are finding us, really a very disenchanting experience to be working with these mainstream media propagandists or houses and individuals. So they think they can use technology to do different things, experiment in the media landscape, which they're doing. There are many great examples coming out of India. And India also brings us the best examples of fact-checking. Why? Because fact-checking is also not just for journalists or for certain people with certain types of interests. The researchers, the academics, the teachers, the journalists. Obviously, we want fact-checked information. But why isn't information necessarily should be fact-checked for citizens as well? to cite one example, you have Data Leads in India, and Data Leads certainly expanded its program, going beyond journalists. It also began with journalists, but it decided to go beyond journalists because it's a citizen's tool. Verification is for everybody, and particularly about health information. That I want to know what drugs I buy from a store and whether it's exactly the right brand, whether our loved ones are taking the correct brand, it's the correct dose, and comes through a proper legally checked system. We all need to have this kind of information. So verification is now becoming a tool for most other industries as well. Doctors are doing it, lawyers are doing it, journalists are doing it, corporates are doing it, because information, just as information, isn't good anymore.
Not just for journalists, because any information is used by everybody, including, for example, doctors, as you said, or anybody else. So we are looking at a potentially dangerous situation where content can be mistaken for facts or information, and lack of verification can only make it worse, because we can act upon that information or content believing it's actual fact and factual information, and then it might mislead us, or it might, like you said, in the case of doctors, it could just kill somebody. But one final thing to kind of muse on is that, for example, Sri Lanka, and you've been part of these organizations and media organizations everywhere, and you keep hopping over to India for various international, meetings, as well as other countries as well. How has been your experience um, as a journalist, watching your audiences or watching the local consumers, if I can call them that, consumers and or prosumers of not just information, of media content, if you want to broaden that. How has been your experience observing? Do you see differences depending on what media system? For example, is it different in China versus in India and Sri Lanka versus in the United States?
I have no romantic notions about how people consume information. And I think one of the things that has happened with the internet is that it plays to your own biases. Your news feeds are that. So you're working in your own echo chambers. If you want to exist in that, you're allowed to do that. And I think that's also a choice people make, whether I only want to deal with those who believe and share my value systems, and belong to my own political, share my own political views, and exclude other views. But I think as journalists, and as you said, Sashi, I also met you through this regional connectivity that has allowed me to experience different countries, their media landscapes, for which I'm extremely thankful. And I do find people really, there are people who make those choices, who prefer to have their news feeds and go with that, and reconfirming your own biases with regard to information, what you want to receive and what you want to relay. But at the same time, I think there is a growing dialogue in South Asia in particular. Probably many of our countries have also been colonized, so we have legacies to carry, we have legal systems that we share, and we also have um, emotional, historical, political baggage that we carry, similar but different, but shared nevertheless in huge stockpiles. And then you have this young media industry. We are also, we how can journalists be any different to the countries or well, no, not necessarily nation states, but we are products of our own culture, our own backdrop, so we reflect those same biases. So the industry reflects that as well. But at the same time, I also see a concerted effort, at least in small ways, in some places in big ways, to use these tools to understand what works best for us, as you know, what is our purpose, why do we do what we do, and why do we need to have ethics of verification, why do we need content integrity, why do we need public trust. The day you don't have public trust, I think good journalism dies. But somebody can counter that argument by saying, well, you have journalists and media institutions that are propaganda machines. But the truth is, we know who they are. We know who the actors are. We call them bad actors. We also know what they will relay and what we will be able to consume. That I know for a while that will work out, and they will always be there. It's like the gossip that that village gossip we were talking to. Now you have a more organized, tech-savvy initiatives out there, but it isn't the truth. The real thing,
like gossip, but it actually is. The village, people
it's more
drinking
innocent.
gossiping, that looks like gossip. This one doesn't look like gossip.
Yeah. So they have all the trappings, the makings of real information, responsibly presented. The packaging is perfect. You have the technology, you have all the tools, you have the resources to use Teams. But we also identify that you and I are capable of identifying those people and those institutions and what their propaganda machines are good at. In a pandemic, would you look? My question would be: would you go to them looking for information when you face something like the pandemic? Would you believe the information? Most of us are finding it difficult to believe the information that the government and the government-driven media houses are dishing out, or those who are in compliance with those dictates. Why? Deep in our hearts, we know that cannot be trusted. So that creates a space still for us to work and survive.
Source itself, we will talk a little bit about official sources and trappings of that as well. One final personal question. I know that you have been traumatized by an incident that happened with your own organization and with your editor. Would you like to share that and how that has changed your journalism?
Oh, it has changed everything about me, I would say. It's been 11 years since he was killed. It has, of course, made me quite a jaded journalist. And to know that my great beliefs of, equality in society and justice for people, all those things have been challenged. But at the same time, I also was raised in a newsroom where there was space for bullying.
Let's start with what happened.
Okay. In 2009, on January 8, 2009, my editor, Lasantha Wickrematunge, a very well-known, internationally known investigative journalist himself, and the founding editor of the Sunday Leader, was killed in broad daylight. So I was his editor investigations at that time. There are many gifts he gave us, and I still think he makes us do what we want to do. He has created a team that believed in integrity of content and given us courage to explore the industry very differently to that of his own. He's also the Transparency International Integrity winner. So he was the first journalist to win the Global TI Award for content integrity. So we are very proud of the legacy he has left. And I also think though we are not his children, we're not, but in so many ways we are his children. We carry forward a mission that he shared, certain values that he inculcated in us, which is also one of the main reasons why I started the Center for Investigative Reporting, because I thought that's the next thing that has to happen, because we need to create, he created this little pool of, resourceful, energetic group of journalists who really want to tell the truth, who did not mind the risks that were attached. So I think it's my opportunity, or my generation's opportunity, to take the next step and create more people and have a ripple effect, have more people who believe in the kind of content that we would like to place in the public domain. It's a very difficult task. To answer the question, how it has changed my life, it has changed my life in every possible way. And then to take risks with enough calculation, to also look after my teams with the same care that he showed. But also to believe that good journalism has its place. And yes, I want to end on that very positive note, because I still think there is a market. We had a market. Good content has a market. Good journalists have a market. And there is a purpose to doing what we do. And there is also room. You just have to push the envelope. He did. So would we. We just need to push that envelope. And we don't live in ideal conditions. But that's also, nobody had it easy. Nobody ever had it easy. So if you're living through it, just live through it and do what you think is the right thing to do.
Journalist always faces a moment of truth in their lives. And I think that kind of journalist is probably the most sensitive to the society and to the tasks that they undertake. They don't have to do it, but they still end up doing that. And I think you are one of them, Ruksh. Thank you very much for sharing your insights, thoughts, and the excellent um, observations and analyses of what we are going through very candidly, both in the region of South Asia as well as in the world. We will truly look forward to more interactions with you. You wanted to say something?
Thank you. Yes, I do. And thank you very much for the opportunity. I really think it's really important, the kind of conversations you're having. It needs to happen in our, it needs to happen organically. I think it's happening. And I think you're making, what you're trying to do is making, it's a very important contribution to an an ongoing discussion, and it needs to be amplified. As much as we say disinformation gets amplification, we need to amplify these discussions, these discourses about why we need to be literate as citizens and consumers and as journalists. It's really a great effort, and I hope you are able to do it globally, locally, and within the region. And I think our region really needs it. And we just need to keep trying. And that's a great thing that you have started.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sashi.